Fiction. Is it truer than we thought? For this speech, my working definition of truth can be stated as follows. Truth is that which accords closest with reality according to the Trinitarian God of the Bible, Yahweh. To introduce you to my topic, I'd like to share a short story about myself. Some time ago, I became really serious about seeking truth and gaining true knowledge, so knowledge which accords with that truth. And when I became that, I pretty much automatically assumed that my days of reading and enjoying fiction were over, that fiction was, in effect, a waste of time. And over time, my belief in that has only been challenged and overcome, and it's been overcome because of the wisdom of very many men and women who have spoken truly about fiction to me, and their wisdom has helped me to see the value of fiction. And we're going to be talking about some of the things that I've learned from them, some things I've learned from books, about the value of fiction. We're going to see fiction's historical use. We're going to see that fiction has historically been used to communicate great truth. We're going to see the elements of fiction, at least some of them, which enable fiction to communicate truth so effectively to human beings. And we're finally going to look at the different type of truth, if you will, that fiction strives to communicate. And hopefully by the end of this speech, anyone who is seeking truth and knowledge, much like I did back then and much like to this day I am, will understand that fiction should not be taken off their list of valuable reading to that end. So first, let's look at the history. We're going to look at the parable of Jesus Christ, namely the Good Samaritan. The parable of the Good Samaritan was a very specific story about this man who was just brutally beaten, left on the brink of death, and the two people who were most likely to help him in all of Israel's society walked by him, kind of distancing him themselves, or one of them even came up and witnessed just this atrocity that had happened to this man and decided to move on, according to Matthew Henry's commentary on the Bible. And finally, we have one man pass by and stop. And this man who passed by and stopped was the least likely of all people in that culture to help this fallen Jewish man, and that was the Samaritan. So, Jesus, by presenting this dilemma, this trouble that had befallen this man, and how he was essentially left for dead by the people most likely to help him, goes on to present a singular man who was able to overturn all notions of neighborliness by transcending all the boundaries that Israel had kind of culturally established between Jewish people and Samaritans. And he's able to enter into a deep fellowship with this other person and go the extra mile time after time to make sure this fallen Jewish man is cared for. So Jesus takes this very specific story that is about other people, and he invites us to consider the truth that's being presented by asking a question. Who acted as a neighbor? Who kept the command of God that you shall love your neighbor as yourself? And the Jewish audience was invited to consider that question and came to the conclusion that it indeed was the Samaritan. So then came the charge to action. Go then and do likewise. So fiction is utilized to communicate a great truth about what it means to actually keep the command of God. Next, we see the various elements of fiction and how they serve to invite people into the story. Point of view is the kind of element of fiction that exists because of a narrator. Because narrators exist, they are either active participants, being first-person narrators, or second or third person, which are kind of more removed from the story, and they are either limited, full, or partial omniscience, meaning that they have different varying degrees of insight into the minds of the other characters. And because the narrator tells us the story, they invite us as readers to actually participate in the behind-the-scenes mental makeup of both the protagonist, usually the antagonist, and sometimes minor characters who set us up to understand different things about those main characters or who are essential or consequential to the plot. Now, the plot is the outworking of events in a story, so basically these two elements of fiction, the point of view and the plot, invite the character into the story such that he can experience the things not as someone who is distant, but someone who is a passive imaginer, according to Dr. Jonathan Gottschall, professor of English. And that's a very unique way in which fiction tends to connect with its readers. Finally, we're going to look at fiction's unique take on the truth. So fiction does not strive to present a mathematical formulation of truth. It doesn't strive to present statistics or anything like that. Rather, it presents us with moral dilemmas and trouble. And it shows us the pathway that a character takes through that trouble, and it shows us what sort of actions lead to victory in some sense through that trouble. What leads to resurrection, what leads to redemption, what leads to any sort of desirable end. And in so doing, we get to vicariously glean the experience of the characters that we are exposed to, and thus we get to learn through them without absorbing the emotional pain that comes along with experiencing those things for ourselves in our own real world. It's a cheap experience, according to one scholar that is quoted in Dr. Gottschall's work, The Storytelling Animal. So in conclusion, we saw that fiction has historically been demonstrated as a mighty pathway for truth. We saw that in the parable of the Good Samaritan. We understood that the elements of fiction, at least the two that we covered, being point of view and plot, connect us with characters in an emotional way. We vicariously experience what they're going through. We connect with the story. It's not just about someone else out there. It's about us right here. And in conclusion, we saw that fiction communicates truth in a altogether different way. It's not a dry analysis or presentation of fact. It is rather a presentation of experience that shows us and teaches us to cheer for good action according to God's standards when it is good fiction. So in conclusion, I'd like to ask you a resounding question to think about. Are you ever too old for a good story? And I hope that you've been persuaded that you are not. Thank you.